again, they talk about tools and techniques, but very often they don't explain why they works, what is the underlying dynamics. And the books that talk about the brain, they're generally very good, but they tend to go too much into details, which are very little practical. So my point is that we should teach leadership how to use what the brain is teaching us from a very practical perspective, not going too much into academic terms, which are interesting but useless from a practical perspective, nor just talking about techniques and tools, because they are difficult to remember and therefore to apply.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. It's an engaging and enlightening talk show on life, relationships, and the business of life. Grab a cup of juice and just chill. Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. Live life. Live fully.
Thanks for tuning into our podcast. We love having you here, and it's our mission to bring you all the latest and greatest tips, skills, and know-how to make you the best that you can be. We know that you have it in you, and we're going to show you how. Now, let's get started.
This is your host, Omobola Stephen on Life Well Lived. Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen is a self-improvement personal development podcast. And with the occasion of expert and professionals who come to the show to share disruptive Mindshift content on any topics on the personal development and self-improvement. It's really been a worthwhile time having this guest share profound insight on topics or subjects on the personal development. Now, it's a pleasure to have Bruna De Palo on the show with me today. Bruna De Palo is a neuroscience-based executive leadership and career coach. Welcome with me on the show today, Bruna De Palo.
Thank you so much, Omobola, for having me. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much, Bruna, for coming to the show. Now, I'm looking forward to your expertise on today's show. Bruna, you'll be talking extensively on individual's brain and the behavior. Now, you'll also be focusing on career, which I believe is a very important topic of discussion for short time as this. Now, Bruna, can you share your insights on the dynamics between an individual's brain and their behavior?
Oh, yes, that's a great topic. I think the most important thing we have to clarify here is, why do we need to learn about the brain? It's because everything that we do and everything that other people do very much depends on the use that we make of our brain. The problem is no one really gave us the user's manual, so we don't really know what to do with it. So we just use it in the best possible way by imitating, mirroring what we've seen our parents and teachers and other people doing since we were kids, or just let it go with the flow without really knowing how we're using it. Now, it is really important that we understand the dynamics that happen inside the brain, because that means understanding big part of human behavior. Now, not only our behavior, what we do, why we do it, and therefore how we can control it, but also what happens in other people's brain and behavior. So this means that in my experience working with clients and teaching them how the brain works, what I've noticed is that the more they learn about themselves, of course, they become more confident, more in control, but they also tend to be much more compassionate with others. So I would say that it also has an impact in terms of emotional intelligence, because by understanding that the behavior that a person is having, it's not just due to their personality or willingness, but it's probably the result of a specific dynamic in their brain, makes them more open to understand and go deeper and be open to, reactions that otherwise they would just label as negative, or maybe, saying that person is lazy or that person is outrageous. If they understand what's happening in their brain, they understand why they do what they do. And that creates a much better understanding of the whole world.
Right. So definitely we have a lot of work to do, right, in understanding how this brain works, Bruna. Now, the basis of leadership is born in the brain. I'm asking this question. Is this a valid assertion? I'd like to hear your input on this.
In terms of leadership, you mean understanding the brain from a leadership perspective?
Right.
Yeah, that's another big topic indeed. I think it's not a nice thing to have, understanding of neuroscience and what neuroscience is teaching us. It's a must for leaders. It's really a must. Why? Because neuroscience, which indeed is the science that studies the brain and that is developed enormously in the last 20 years, is able to tell us exactly what happens in the brain in certain specific circumstance. Now, when we look at these, when we look at the data, what we realize is that if we want our company, for example, to increase revenue, profit, and retainment of our talent, we really have to understand the role of emotions in human behaviors. So neuroscience is informing leadership by giving them the understanding and then the tools and techniques to really make the most of the employee's brain. So I would say that nowadays it's a must for a leader to understand the application of what neuroscience is telling us, which is not new, Omobola, because as you know, there are plenty of books that talk about the brain and lots of techniques and tips. I mean, we're full of books on leaderships. But the problem is, again, they talk about tools and techniques, but very often they don't explain why they work, what is the underlying dynamics. And the books that talk about the brain, they're generally very good, but they tend to go too much into details, which are very little practical. So my point is that we should teach leadership how to use what the brain is teaching us from a very practical perspective, not going too much into academic terms, which are interesting but useless from a practical perspective, nor just talking about techniques and tools because they are difficult to remember and therefore to apply. So I think something in between, a little bit of theory, practical theory, as I call it, and then tools are probably the best solution to get the most out of employees' brain.
Right now, Bruna, I really still want us to talk about how this brain works and talking about how we can implement new actionable strategies for our growth. In clear, relatable, and practical terms, can you share with my audience how this brain works really?
The brain works in a very complex way, but it can be translated into simple, practical terms. And I would say that the most important thing that we have to consider is that the brain has two different ways to respond to stimuli, and that is either with a sense of threat or with a sense of reward. When we understand this dynamic and what happens inside the brain with the production of neurotransmitters, when the brain responds one way or another, that determines the whole understanding of behavior. Because when we feel a sense of threat, it means we are producing cortisol, which is the stress hormone. When we produce that hormone, we can't think straight because that the circuit that regulates fear and therefore the one that is stimulated when we feel threatened, and we can be threatened by a real danger or a perceived danger. When we activate that circuit, the message that the brain receives is, please save my life. Now, in saving our lives, there's no space for learning or collaborating or thinking straight. When we want to save our lives, we just want to run away or get frozen in front of a danger. So that's why when the brain responds with a sense of threat and we produce cortisol, we can't think straight. And that's why things like, for example, micromanaging at work doesn't really work. It doesn't really bring good results, because when we micromanage a person, we're basically saying, I don't trust your way of thinking. Let me help you because I can think better than you. This is somehow perceived as threatening. So what happens in the brain responds with cortisol. And of course, we can still function, but not at our best. Because as I said, when there is cortisol, we can't think or learn straight, because the attitude that our body and brain have in that moment is to just get frozen or run away from the potential threat. Conversely, when our brain respond with a sense of reward, of course, we feel much better. But the reason why we feel better is because in the brain, we start producing positive neurotransmitters that feel positive, like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. And when we feel in this way, for example, when we're given some level of autonomy, at work instead of micromanaging. When we produce these neurotransmitters, we are setting the brain to think at its best. We're also setting an internal state that enhance the level of perception, the level of collaboration, cognitive thinking, creative insight, and so on. So what that means is we need to understand how the brain works, especially from a leadership perspective, but also from a career perspective, because we want to put our collaborators always in a condition to have their brain enhanced as much as possible. But also in terms of our own career, we want to choose type of career roles and companies that tend to put us more into a state of reward where we can function at 100%, rather than threatening us where we know we cannot succeed because we are not fully present. And there's not much you can do. As I said, it's a brain dynamic. You can't have control of how cortisol acts inside your body, but you can make conscious decision to stay far as much as possible from threatening environments and choose those that are more rewarding, which is, technically speaking, what is happening with the Great Resignation in the US and in other countries as well. Even the UK is going through this phase as well, where people, maybe they don't know the dynamic behind all this, but what they're trying to do is to stay far from everything that feels toxic, and they just want to feel good, because feel good is the only way to really succeed.
Right, that's truly important. Bruna, I have two questions in one. Now you talk about career, but I want us to talk about gifts. How can a person use the gift or talents to determine their career? So how should a person also apply their gift in a workplace or environment? I would like you to put this in proper perspective.
That's a very, very good question as well, Omobola, and it's my favorite topic indeed, because I realized there's one of my specializations is to help people change their career, and I use exactly this angle. I say that people shouldn't look for a career that makes them happy, and they shouldn't pursue the career that they want, because happiness and wants can change over time, and there are many factors that make you want something or don't want something anymore, or make you happy or unhappy. Like, for example, the presence of a good or a bad boss. So happiness and want are fluctuating and are not indicative of what could be the right career for you. Now, the only thing that really makes sense to look at is your gifts. And by gifts, I don't mean only talents, but I mean everything that you bring into the world, that when you use it, you feel alive, something that you tend to do well, and something that when you do it, you feel in the state of flow. So a gift can also be an idea or a vision, or the combination of your values, something that when you use it, it makes you feel great, it makes you feel alive. So the right career of a person, someone who's changing career or someone who's starting out right now, the best choice is always the one that taps into these gifts. A career that makes use of your gifts, that honor your gifts on top of your values, of course, your vision and your mission. But gifts are key, because that means there will be a natural flow. And I'm saying this, Omobola, because I changed my career. I've been in IT before. I used to work in IT, and I've been there for 20 years, and I was unfulfilled, desperate. I was working as a human doing instead of a human being. I wasn't there. And if I ask myself, okay, what was missing? It was a great company, great colleagues, nice salary. What was really missing is that I wasn't expressing my gifts. So that's how I came to realize that the only way to feel alive at work, and aliveness is way more than happiness. Aliveness and fulfillment is what keeps you going no matter what. So that's what we should aim for, not happiness, not wants, but aliveness. When we do this, we tend to feel alive. There's always a reason why you feel alive. And generally, it's because you're using part of you that I consider a gift. And when you do it, you also tend to go faster and to do better. because it's just what you're here for. After all, you've been given some gifts